a massive thing for the people that are cold. There is an abundance of people that are lacking warmth, lacking clothes, and they're stuck on the border and they're just sitting on the side of the bush, on the side of the road. Yeah. Come to Tallin. All right, we got first gear.
Yes.
She's got the generator in. Please get in touch with us. The faster we get bulk equipment, then the faster we can give it back to the Ukrainians.
Hello everybody and welcome to There's a Will. I'm Will Richardsson, and with me in the studio I have some interesting guests. Two of them who've been, one living in Kiev, that's Joseph Stec in the white shirt there, and next to him is Daniel Russell. I know him as Rusty, and so do all his friends. Some of us call him Trusty Rusty because he's been making so many runs back and forth across the border that he has become my hero, and not only mine, and also raising money. So good on ya, as they say, or something like that in Australia.
Aussie in training.
Because you're Australian. And Joseph is, of course, from Ohio. If you saw the previous show, we talked about that. And Miriam Shaded, of course, who's joining us regularly, along with Harold von Kursk, our correspondent in the Baltics. Harold, how are you? And what's the story up there? We'll start with you.
Greetings to everyone. The situation here is relatively calm. Of course, everybody is terribly anxious over what is going to be the fate of the Ukrainians now that the Russians appeared to have launched into the Aleppo-style phase of their invasion, where they are using bombardment of civilian targets as a way to terrorize the local population in the face of terrific resistance of guerrilla Ukrainian units on the ground.
Yes, of course. That's we all share that. Are you worried up there? Because as this thing continues, we're all worried about this Suwałki corridor, which is the northeast of Poland, which runs between the border of Lithuania and Belarus and over to Kaliningrad. We're all worried about that because we know Kaliningrad is an armed camp, don't we, Joseph? Yeah?
Yes.
And it's like a teacher in school. Hey! Anyway, we can have a sense of humor even though we face the apocalypse, perhaps. And that might be a good name for this show, Apocalypse Perhaps. Miriam's got something for us. How are you today, Miriam?
I'm doing okay, kind of stressed out with everything. But yeah, the president, Polish president, signed an act about enforcing national mobilization in Poland. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of worried. What does that mean?
When was this? Yesterday?
That was yesterday. Yeah. Thanks to that, our gross national income will 3% will go to the army. Mm-hmm. So from 2 now to 3. But everybody's going to have to be mobilized.
2% now, which is the NATO minimum. Now it's going to 3. And what does the mobilization mean exactly?
When I was reading the act, that means that everybody, most of the people need to be mobilized.
Is there an age group?
I didn't see an age group, but men and women.
Men and women.
And as well, every foreigner that lives in Poland and is living in Poland as well.
So that includes me?
If you have 2 passports.
Oh, I don't. This is important. I don't have 2 passports, so I will still be
no idea how it
able to flee to Germany. No, I think I have to stay.
The whole how will it look?
Yeah.
But we are all obligated to be trained how to protect.
Mm-hmm.
That's a scary thought.
It is.
It is.
Scary.
I mean, how does that strike you?
Well, I've got 2 passports.
As a double passport
actually
holder.
sits in my back court, and it's quite rattling. It's really rattling. And
you've just heard that when you came into the studio.
Just heard that 5 minutes ago.
Yeah,
so,
before we were on air.
Yeah, that's a whole new level of something to think about. Yeah, on a big scale.
It's serious. And we just had the prime ministers of Poland, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia, was it?
Yeah.
Who went over on a train to show solidarity, came back because the sky is not safe for any plane, Russian or Ukrainian or anyone else. And they went over to show solidarity with the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, and then returned safely and arrived back to apparently create this act of mobilization, which
this is
is
the president.
The president has done it, but after that trip, right? So I wonder if it's something they learned on the trip or if it was just already in the cards. Hard to know.
I'm not sure.
But we'll have to look into that. Miriam?
Yeah, so with the refugee crisis now, we crossed over 2 million. And the cases, everybody, I guess, don't know what to do or act, because, you know, in the worst case scenario that can be, should we evacuate everybody or like giving them temporary houses over here and apartments? So you don't know which way to go, because if there is a bigger threat as well for the Baltic Sea country and Poland, then what to do with the refugees. But I think for right now, the biggest issue is toilets. There's not enough toilets even to wash or places, so we should...
You mean on the borders or where the refugees, in the centers?
In the centers, everywhere.
Yeah. Well, there's a big center in Warsaw. They turned one of the exhibition halls, I think?
Yeah, but there's one toilet for...
Tall wall is become one.
For a couple hundred people. So we already had a problem with the homeless. In Poland, they didn't have places to wash.
Yeah.
And I think it was a huge issue. And now it's with the refugees, it's much bigger issue now.
Well, we just added 2 million people to that homeless problem, but people are taking them in, which is, I mean,
phenomenal.
The most incredible Dunkirk operation. Now, and speaking of Dunkirk operations, we'll come to you in a second, Joseph, and you can tell us some more about your trip over. Because you came from, I want to say right now that you people are watching us for the first time. You came from Kiev. You drove out and into Poland with your wife and some other people. And you, who were the other people with you?
I left with my wife, our 2 cats, and our dog. And then later, my sister-in-law came. And then later, after we were in Lublin and then in Warsaw, then my in-laws came. So we sort of, I wanted to evacuate earlier, and then we sort of led the charge, and then the family slowly followed afterwards. So a lot of people that I know in Ukraine have a big problem that their grandmother doesn't want to leave or their mother doesn't want to leave, and that keeps people in. But in my case, us leaving kind of got the train moving towards Poland.
You were able to get people out.
Yes.
I mean, to get them to agree, because yes, this is a problem that, you know, it's almost, I mean, to be humorous in another situation, because we all know that that a lot of times our grandmothers and mothers, as they get older, don't want to change their life. They like what they're doing, where they are, right? Yeah, I know my mother's like that. And they don't want to move.
And then what I've seen is, as other people have come to Warsaw, my wife and I have picked up a lot of people, and they were talking to their mother or their grandmothers in Kharkiv or Mariupol, and then all of a sudden they lose contact with them. And then so this creates sort of a disastrous waiting game where people are checking social media, the news, nonstop, and they're seeing, you know, did my mother's apartment building get bombed? You know, where is my grandmother? She's in a bomb shelter. Do they even have, you know, water or food? So you're just
constantly... facilities.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you're constantly checking
oh my goodness,
social media to see if people are alive, or even if they have, you know, just basic resources to stay alive.
This is a really big thing that I've noticed, and every time we've been there, we've seen that exactly happening, and people that we've been bringing out has been going on about their grandmas and their mums and other people that are too scared to flee, and we've noticed that a hell of a lot, and we've started to do this.
Why don't you tell us a little bit more? May I jump in for a second, and then I'm going to throw it over to you? Yeah. Because I wanted to say that Joseph came from Kiev here, and you've been going from here to Lviv several times now. Yeah. And I went with you the first time, early on, and then we were on the road where they bombed that. It was just. Do you know where we had to make that funny turn?
Yeah, we did
a turn and we came back to the road. That was the road to that place.
I know.
It was very close. It was a couple of miles.
Yeah. Who would have thought?
And we did do a turnaround there on our way back, and had an amazing ride. But can you give us an overview of the kind of relief that you've raised, what your mission is?
Yeah, sure. We've got a campaign going with a big crew of friends in Australia who have started a fundraiser, and I think we've nearly hit 65,000 Australian dollars, which is huge and not expected from the start, and it's growing bigger and bigger. And as a result, with the funds, we've managed to come up and conjure new ideas and so forth. And the main objective is that funds come in, we take the funds and purchase and source equipment, supplies for the refugees and for defence personnel that they require and that they're lacking, such as cold clothes, thermals, boots and things like this.
Non-lethal stuff you're supplying to the militia.
Of course, non-lethal stuff.
You took a generator, didn't you?
We took a generator to power a field for some of the soldiers.
Yeah.
Things like that are just helpful, that they're lacking in funds with, because they're all lacking funds. And mainly for the refugees is the priority, especially people in the lines at the borders that are waiting there for 2 or 3 days, and their grandmas, mums, pregnant ladies, and we're giving them blankets, chairs, food and that type of thing, as well as fuel for people that are breaking down, and the list goes on. And every time we go there, we invent new ideas as the times change, because it's quite dynamic. But our main objective is to show that we are taking the funds and then we're actually delivering the supplies directly to the Ukrainians, and it's landing directly in their back pocket. It's not being deviated. It's not.
Yeah, and you can just keep for people who want to know, you can keep your receipts and show that against
it's all very
against the money. Then people know. But I call you Trusty Rusty, and one of the reasons is because you're useful, man. You're quite a road warrior, I have to say. The Mel Gibson of this show. And as we were saying previously, and Miriam said, "Oh yes, he really is like Mel Gibson."
My mum,
so there's two of us who thought that. Joseph was like, "Who am I? Bruce Willis?"
Bruce Willis, everybody.
But you have to.
Can I add one more point to the chain of people moving west? So I met. A lot of people don't think about it. They call it now IDPs, internally displaced people. But people don't think about that. After 2014, tons of people moved to Kiev and to Lviv. So where I live in Irpin was really sleepy until 2014. But
can you tell us, we should say, it was sleepy till 2014, but can you say and remind people where Irpin is, because it's been a focus in the news in the early stages of the war and to today?
So Irpin is... It's not like Americans might say a suburb, but more of a satellite city. So it's very close to, it's right on the border with Kiev. So it's northwest Kiev. So you have Irpin, Bucha, Vorzel, and then Gostomel. And Gostomel has this strategic airport where it had the biggest airplane in the world, which was being used to deliver COVID supplies until the Russians blew it up. So it's very strategic also for troops to come in, and then because there's the big airport there. So until 2014, it was very sleepy. Then when everyone came in from Donetsk and Lugansk, there was a big need for housing in Kiev. So it went from 30-some thousand to over 100,000. So that totally changed Irpin, totally changed Kiev. Like, you used to be able to take the Kiev metro at 10 o'clock at night and get a seat, but it's totally jam-packed 24/7 now. Or it was. But then these people that lost their homes in 2014 moved to Kiev, spend years getting restarted, and then once again their lives gets destroyed. Or as yesterday, people text me and say, you know, my teacher died in Mariupol. So it's just, it's really terrible to see.
It's extremely moving for all of us, and you try to keep a little distance to, and then you find yourself even getting choked up at moments and you don't expect it. So you're not alone in that. We're all in that same boat.
That's someone who's like 22, who I used to do charity work with for COVID, and then, you know, they're worried about their grandmothers, their teachers, and then will they have to go into war? So this war affects people for generations, like mentally, the stress. I've seen families that the father came back from the East and he had problems with PTSD or alcoholism, and then that affects that family, and then...
You mean from Siberia or something?
No,
like that?
just from fighting.
Oh, from fighting, you mean recent fighting? Yeah.
Yeah, so
Not in the old days, but there's that too.
Yes, exactly. So
of course, in many families.
And then these families are affected because the father comes back and he's either alcoholic or has PTSD, can't be with the family.
It's a snowball effect.
Yeah, so then those kids will grow up with problems from having an abusive father who came back from the war. So then those things just, they just radiate for...
Yeah, it's growing legs and arms, and in every angle that you could imagine, it's going to affect a whole lot of categories, which is a real shame. It's a crying shame, and it's all close to our hearts. It's all close to our families and people that we know.
How do you feel when you're doing these runs? I mean, we're going to talk in the second segment. We'll talk a little bit more specifically about what you've been doing, Rusty. But and we're going to talk about the speech of Vladimir Putin in the next section. But after the break. But how do you feel when you're doing this? I mean, I got my own, but you've done this several times.
Yeah, so every time I've been, it's not really a big thing for me. It's sort of an automatic response, and it sort of snowballed from my Ukrainian partner, and it just grew into
a larger... You mean your girlfriend is...
My girlfriend.
I think you're maybe... Did you put a ring on her finger?
Cut. No, we haven't. But yeah, we'll see what happens.
She's a very nice lady. I know.
She is. She's a sweetheart.
Yeah. She's great. So I understand. You're doing this. I think it's important to mention that because you also have a connection, not just that you're in Poland and Polish, but you have a connection, personal connection, as does Joseph. Yeah. With I have a lot of Ukrainian friends. I mean, Vova, the cameraman that I do work with, Vova, is from Kiev. His brother's still there. And to cap your point, with another personal example, Vova's brother can't leave because the mother won't leave. So everybody's staying because of the mother. Doesn't want to leave. And this is such a... Just difficult situation, that it just kills you, when you think about it. That you think you know what the right direction is, and you can't do it because
it's a clash.
Roots are set.
Yeah, there's nothing you can do.
For so many years, and then perhaps she's thinking, well, this is what I know. Why should I change? Yeah. I'd rather stay in this soil that I know than go and leave and have to, I'm too old to move or something like that. I don't think it's true, but because survival is survival.
Yeah, that's it.
But you have to put yourself in the shoes.
You do. You can't.
And in the situation.
Understand it until you're there, I suppose. In that
I think
situation.
It's very difficult.
Yeah, it would be.
To imagine what. It's always difficult to imagine what someone else is going through that you haven't experienced yourself. But you have to try. And be empathetic or something.
You've just touched on it again, and you touched on it just before with regards to the people that are staying behind and stubborn in their old ways and not sure about leaving and whatnot. And that's one thing that we've been noticing a hell of a lot. And what we're trying to do is do campaigns and interviews of people that have come through, that we've brought through, and speaking to them afterwards as well, and trying to relay their stories back to the refugees that are in the Ukraine for them to see and get motivated and see that it is possible and see that it has happened and that it's quite feasible and it's actually happening. And we're trying to roll out like a lot of interviews with people that we've brought back so that it gets shared and the stories go back to the refugees that are scared to flee, and they see that there's a chance that it can happen, because I'm not too sure if it's happening. And hopefully it can get to them and it can maybe uplift them a bit to actually make the effort to flee. So
Miriam, in the last few minutes, 2 or 3 minutes of this segment, can you tell us what it's like to be a refugee? Because you've worked with refugees, as we said, from Syria. You brought a lot of Christian refugees who had no place to go during that war, and that was also Putin and Assad working together to, as you mentioned, to level cities, to use gas and all of these various things.
But as they said, one of the biggest emotions that have the refugees is guilt, because they're leaving somebody behind. And unfortunately, most of the women, they have to just run because then they're leaving their husbands, their boyfriends, their fathers. So that's one of the things. Second, it's hard to travel to a different country, no language. So now Poland, as I encouraged the politics to help with the documents, with being able to work, because before it was a huge barrier in Poland. Now they took it away. So they did a great job on that, on enforcing and implementing all the regulations that I was talking about before. And other thing is, being forced, running away from your house for all your dreams, for it's just the
your work, your friends, your neighbors,
friends. It's the it's dehumanizing. Dehumanizing. And especially
I think
as
this
women.
is a key word. This whole thing is dehumanizing, not just the victims of it, but all of us.
It is.
All of us.
All of us. Yes, please.
I just texted my sister that today's St. Joseph's Day, so my family they always celebrated that with me and my father. And I thought I always save the cards from my parents. So I have, typewritten letters from my Ukrainian grandpa. All those are in Irpin. And I can rebuild a house, but I can never write a letter for my grandpa.
These are the things.
Physical.
These are the things that get lost. If you had to go, what would you put in that bag besides that you had to carry, besides what you need immediately to survive? And you cannot bring. I mean, I've thought about myself. What would I bring? I'd have to leave all my books. I'd have to leave all clothes, photographs. You can bring those with you. They better be digitalized.
Hard drives.
Yeah, take your hard drives, put everything on your hard drives. And take. I mean, I think that's the only thing I would really want to have is those things.
Your filing cabinet, which is your hard drive these days.
Yeah,
Well,
that's your
women
filing
took
cabinet.
their kids.
Filing
so
cabinets
that's
are
the
obsolete.
one.
They're a good point, actually. Sorry, man.
Women took their kids. That was the action. First one. They just took their kids and ran away with the kids.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's the most important. I would take medicine probably, and money.
Medicine and money. This is the other thing. You need cash, don't you? What if the system breaks down? You can't use cards. You're going to need cash. There's so many issues that are being raised. We're coming to the end of the segment, so let me just summarize what we've been talking about. We've talked about the mobilization of the Polish nation in defense, which is quite incredible, astounding. You see the look on Rusty's face that this is hitting home hard. We talked about the refugees and the difficulty that they face, leaving everything they know behind and going into the unknown. And it is the unknown. The only thing we know is that the future at the moment is unknown. I want to thank you for watching this first segment. Stay with us for more with Joseph Stec, with Daniel Russell, otherwise known as Rusty, and with Miriam Shaded. Thank you for being with us. We really appreciate it. And Harold von Kursk. We'll get more from you. Harold, I guess you've been listening intently. Vladimir Putin made a speech to a stadium of people. What was that? Can you describe it?
He was saying that people need to mobilize and give their souls to a better cause, which is saving the Ukrainians and saving their brothers. And he was talking about annexing Crimea.
Crimea?
Yeah, Crimea.
This is the anniversary
and
of
there was 200,000 of Russians over there. So we need to, when we see those kind of pictures, that there were so many Russians on Putin's speech, how many Russians do support it?
Yeah.
And we need to really consider sanctioning all Russians.
Well, they're being sanctioned now. You think there need to be more sanctions?
No, just the oligarchs. Not all of the Russians are being sanctioned, and still there's a discussion about Putin's girlfriend and kids being in Switzerland, and we need to analyze everything.
Yeah.
How to behave.
You don't think the sanctions are enough, Harold? What do you say about Putin's speech and about perhaps further sanctions?
Well, Putin's speech is one more example of how he is trying to impose his deluded and fallacious concept of history on the world. I mean, what's a great tragedy about all this, and the possibility that there might be 10 million Ukrainian refugees and tens of thousands of dead Ukrainians when all this is over, if it's going to be over in the short term. What people are missing is that often history is dictated by economic, material forces, sometimes by religious movements, ideological movements. But in this case, the whole-scale destruction of a country is based on a pathological narcissism deeply rooted in the brain of Putin.
I agree.
And what we're faced with today, there's only one question we have to answer. To what extent is the West willing to tolerate the massacre and mass murder of Ukrainians and the destruction of an independent country? Are we ready to draw the line? I hope NATO is ready to draw the line.
How are you going to draw the line, Harold? Because I mean, I'm with you, but how do you recommend that we do that based on your reading and what's television reports?
The West has to be prepared to defend NATO territory at all costs. If Russia launches a small-scale nuclear weapon into Western territory, the West has to be prepared to do exactly the same. The West is loaded with small-scale nuclear weapons, which can easily deliver massive blows to Russian forces without causing mass radiation. But the fundamental question that we're looking at is that for the past 2 months, Russia and the West have been locked in this colossal high-stakes game of brinkmanship, where each side tries to impose its will and force the other party to blink. At the beginning, pre-invasion, there was plenty of, what shall we say, rapid eye movement on the part of West, NATO, and Germany in particular. Now, to Putin's shame and surprise, not so much. And of course, isn't it tragic that all this is rooted in one man's perverted sense of history, the fact that he has been brooding about the state of affairs of the former Soviet Union and now the Russian Federation ever since he was forced to leave East Germany, where he ranked as the KGB's chief torturer in service of Honecker's East German satellite regime. And what we're seeing now is that there's both, there's sort of a paranoid aspect to his behavior. And it has both a political and psychological dimension. The political dimension is that Putin, for years, has been trying to reimagine Russia as a type of imperial power dating back to the days of Catherine the Great, who first launched an attack on Ukraine, in effect, when she deprived the Cossacks of their political and military power in the 17th century, and then banned the Ukrainian language and literature for many years. And this happened again in the late 19th century when the Austro-Hungarian Empire in Russia, where you saw again Ukrainians being forced not to learn their language except inside of Ukraine, and where even the teaching of Ukraine was sometimes forbidden in certain schools. And the psychological element of this is that Putin has felt strategically impotent ever since the defeat of the Soviet Union, thanks to Reagan and his massive arms spending, and the fact that Russia lost the Cold War. So isn't it incredible that all this suffering is the result of one man's extreme psychological derangement?
Yes, and it's very Hitler-like in this aspect, that it really is the personality of this one man, it appears to be. And also, we can, by looking back at the last days of Hitler, remember that he turned against his own people, and we're seeing, he turned against his own people and said, "You've let down the Reich, and therefore you don't deserve to live. And I'm willing to go all the way," as he did in the bunker, kill himself. And at the same time, he was murdering his own nation, and that included all the young boys who were sent into the line, not to mention civilians, because he refused to make a peace earlier. That is the thing that's most scary. How close are we to this kind of...
I don't think we're close at all. I'm convinced that Putin is a rational actor in the limited sense of rationality being that he will respond to a clear demonstration of force. For example, if Russia results to carpet bombing of Ukrainian cities as its so-called invasion bogs down in the face of very determined Ukrainian guerrilla fighting tactics, which is slowly destroying many elements of the Russian advance. If that happens, NATO will be forced, I believe, morally and strategically to impose a no-fly zone. And then we will see what's the price of brinkmanship.
What about a UN? What about a UN fly zone? I think the UN is the place to go. It makes more sense because this would include, I think it's a 70% vote, doesn't require the Security Council. With a 70% vote, I mean, check this, I did read this in a reputable source. They could, in fact, create a UN no-fly zone rather than a NATO fly zone. And that brings the world in, because right now it appears to be NATO and Putin at loggerheads with the Chinese on the sideline saying, well, let's just see what happens. They did not offer to help the Russians, even though they've been asked. This is something slightly positive. Yes.
I want to say something. Germany is backing the rebuilding money for Poland, and they destroyed Poland in Second World War II. It was all destroyed, and they haven't paid for it. And the problem is that people who do destroy other countries, that's what Putin is doing. He's not paying for it.
Well, he needs to go rebuild Syria as well.
He needs to go rebuild Syria. We need to sanction him that hard that not only you're just not going to make deals, but you have to pay every single penny back for restoring, repaying, and for all the health care, for all the people, for traumatized, every single expense. These countries that are attacking, they need to pay back. That's a huge case, because when they don't pay back, they do it again.
Or it happens again, because the example leads these dictators, and it is dictators, isn't it, that are causing the problem. Just when we think that the West's example, you see that this is the thing. Freedom should be strong. It shouldn't show weakness. And because the very nature of freedom is being willing to die for defending it. Now, that doesn't mean creating total oblivion, creating a situation in which we assure mutual destruction. But we are looking at even a more serious situation now than in the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, which was the greatest crisis of the post-war period. This is worse. And that was close to a nuclear holocaust.
Will, I would have to disagree with you. I don't think we're anywhere near to the type of nuclear brinkmanship we saw between Kennedy and Khrushchev.
Well, would you say why? Yeah.
Because I think that situation was saved chiefly by a remarkable back channel when, as you remember, there were two letters famously sent by Khrushchev. One, which was one he wrote personally and which was transmitted to Kennedy and his cabinet, offered to remove Soviet missiles from Cuba if the United States would remove their missiles from Turkey. Then, 24 hours later, when Khrushchev was facing a revolt amongst hardliners in his own cabinet, he sent another letter which did not offer the same conditions and was completely unacceptable. And it was Kennedy's decision to respond very cleverly to the first letter, which ultimately resolved the Cuban Missile Crisis. But I think the world was very close to a nuclear warfare in those days, and the Russians had a certain advantage in terms of the numbers of warheads that they had. Today, the American nuclear force is vastly superior, even if the Russians do have more numbers of warheads, but it's highly questionable whether these can be delivered given the inferiority of the Russian military apparatus. And the Americans have such superiority in the air and in their submarine fleet that Russia would definitely be 100% annihilated, and perhaps only 20 to 30% of the United States would be. But of course, we're speaking, when you're talking about 20% annihilation, it's difficult to speak
and also,
of victory.
We're in Warsaw, and it goes first. So the point is, I appreciate what you said. Thanks for the background. But one of the points you mentioned about the back channels is exactly what I think is the problem now, is that we don't have the back channel, apparently, and this reasonable, even at the brink of nuclear war, this back channel that was between Khrushchev and Kennedy. Khrushchev was a different sort of man and was able to make that compromise. But thank you, Harold, for that.
Well, can I
yes, please
make one quick point going back to the comparisons to Hitler? So when Hitler was in power, he was obsessed with the other infiltrating the purity of the German race. So the other was different, and he was afraid that it was going to come inside. Whereas Putin sees the other as Ukrainians or Poles or the Baltic nations and believes that they are in the wrong because they have the audacity to be separate, free, sovereign nations.
From Russia.
Exactly. So
which formerly occupied for some time. But,
So, for example,
one of the things which is driving Putin's ideological and political conception of Ukraine is the fact that he doesn't believe that they are a legitimate country. He believes that they don't have the rights which Lenin initially accorded Ukraine and gave them the status of an independent state, and which Stalin then accepted until 1932, when he started with the
Great Famine.
Yes, the Great Famine and the destruction of the Ukrainian farming system, which led to 6-7 million Ukrainian deaths. Maybe the estimates are difficult to really resolve, but this was the beginning.
Okay, Harold, that's a very good point. Let me take over here, because I want to get something from Rusty while we've got him here about some of his on-the-ground experience and his story with some snapshots of what he's been doing. I just want to say that, if in fact the Ukrainians were brothers, then why did they, to the Russians, and why did they starve them in the great grain basket that Ukraine is, which it's known for? Throughout the world, why did they destroy them with a famine? So they weren't that important to the Russians during the 1930s. And if Putin looks to Stalin, then this is a complete contradiction of his words with past actions of Russia. Now, but I want to come back to your personal story, because while this is fascinating and we could go on, and we will in the next shows, with discussing the history and how that affects the present, let's talk about the present and get some of your, tell us about your trips and what you're seeing.
One of the main things that's quite impregnating and lasting on the back of my eyelids is every time I go, the look, I suppose, on the look of disarray and the trauma in the refugees' eyes every time we get over the border. It's one thing that I'll always see every trip is the people in the lines, the mums and the grandmas and the kids and the children. Same as in the train station in Lviv. It's another area that's got the same effect on me as well, and it's a daunting, unknown, the look of disarray and disillusion, and it looks like they all have a big question of why in their eyes, and why me, sort of thing. And that's one thing that I always see every time that I go there, which is quite horrid and impregnating, and you have to sort of wonder where they're coming from and why they're in that situation, and they can't put the finger on the button as to why this has happened, and to be in that scenario where they can't rationalise why this is happening, it must be absolutely devastating to be in that environment. So that's one thing that always sits with me. And we see that every day, every time that we go.
Can you remember some specific instances that particularly struck you?
For sure. When we went over the border, I was driving with my good friend Roger. We went over Korshakov, and we got in there maybe within 20 minutes, which was rather quick, and then we entered into the Ukrainian side into an absolute apocalyptic scene, which I'd never seen before, and there were maybe 15,000 refugees fleeing, and it must have been one of the most congested days. Everyone was trying to flee, and it was turmoil. All law and order had broken out, police sirens screaming, All the roads were blocked. Ambulances couldn't even get in to mitigate the accidents that were happening, and everyone was crammed. Women were crying. It was a horrific little moment. We managed to squeeze through, really on the brink of being trapped, and these people, I'm sure, would have been stuck there for at least 2 or 3 days in the freezing cold. That was one of the scenarios that we've seen. Yeah.
What's it like going over there now? Because I remember we were talking about it when we went. Well, it'd be pretty easy to hit different things with missiles, or with helicopter gunships, or with aircraft in the west, and to interdict some of these lines where people are retreating, and also where material is being shipped in, both lethal and non-lethal. How do you feel about that situation now, having been through it several times?
Well, I suppose...
And going again soon.
Yeah, well, I suppose the materials and logistic type of things that are going in, they're quite well known, and there's only a few roads that actually lead into Ukraine from the west, so that shouldn't be hard for them to work out. But when you say the refugees and the congested regions, that's quite hard to tell. It's dynamically changing. It's forever changing. So if they wanted to attack a congested area of refugees, it would be quite hard to nail it, because some days it's really congested, then the other day it's totally empty, and they are starting to choose different borders and disperse from the main extraction points, which is Korshakov and Medika and Herbena seem to be the main routes from Lviv, but now everyone's starting to realise that they need to spread further north and
maybe
south towards Belarus.
I'm not sure about north is a good idea, closer to Belarus, but certainly
closer to Belarus.
The southwest is still
southwest is probably
safe.
better.
Hasn't been struck.
It has been, It has not been,
and in the mountains.
May I ask,
and this is impossible.
May I ask if Lviv is in effect acting as a hub where the refugees meet in various camps and then are dispersed to various exit routes?
It's been attacked yesterday.
All the buses seem to leave Lviv, and the buses mainly go to Korshakova. It's the fastest route and the main road, and the least bumpy and accessible. I think that is their priority track out. I don't know why. I don't know why the buses aren't split up from Lviv and shared and dispersed amongst all the borders to alleviate the congestion there. I'm not too sure why it's not happening.
I happen to know, I got a friend on the border with Romania in Ukraine. A lot of people are in this area. They're staying where they feel it's safe, they think it's safe, and well, I guess what they feel is more important at this point. There is this feeling that if you're in the southwest, you're towards the mountains, and far away from, you're further away from targets that might be hit. Because we know they hit a military training base near Lviv, the one we talked about in the previous segment that we'd gone by. They also, without knowing it, I might add, again, and they also attacked a maintenance maintenance facility. It's important, of course, strategic. And they bombed the airport in Ivano. I can't ever say it right. Frankovich or
Frankivsk.
Frankivsk, yeah. And so those, it seems like areas where there are not these strategic targets tend to be safer, as I was saying before, in the southwest. Those people haven't had any air raids or anything so far. But you know, if you're the Russians, you're not really going to attack mountains, and those roads would be impossible for them anyway. This is where it would be the place of last defense. I don't see it could ever be taken without nuclear strikes. So they're not going to get the whole country. They haven't got the men to get the whole country anyway. But do you feel that there is increased risk for you, or do you think, well, based on the odds, because you're an ex-military man, and you've seen some action.
A long time ago in 1999, we were in the reserves.
But you saw some, didn't you?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
And do you feel any sense of...
I don't think so still. I think it's still quite safe because, like you said, the main targets that they're looking at are military bases, airports, and those type of facilities which don't include people like us and the civilians and the refugees. However, you look at the other cities internally and that that hypothesis goes straight out the door.
I mean, what if they start bombing the interior of Lviv? They might, because there was some rockets knocked down on their way in. I'm going to have to wrap us up now. Harold, do you want to say something, 20 seconds to us?
I should just like to hope that the Russians see the truth of what's going on and sue for peace in some sense, because their military operation is going nowhere.
Right. Thank you for that. Joseph, last
Don't hold
word?
your breath, Harold.
Don't hold your...
Sorry.
Joseph says don't hold your breath. Okay, I've got to wrap it up now. I want to thank everybody for watching this program, and I hope that it's been somewhat instructive and both emotionally and intellectually. I want to thank Joseph Stec in the studio. I want to thank Daniel Russell, Rusty, and I want to thank Miriam Shaded. Thank you very much for being with us. I want to thank you, Harold von Kursk, for your excellent analysis from Tallin in Estonia, right up there on the coast, looking across to Finland. And I want to thank you, most of all, for watching. Please share this show. Like this show. This is coming to you from beautiful downtown Warsaw as it exists today. And we hope will exist for another 1,000 years. So, Godspeed to all of you, and wish us well here in Poland. Thanks for watching.
A massive thing for the people that are cold. There is an abundance of people that are lacking warmth, lacking clothes, and they're stuck on the border and they're just sitting on the side of the bush, on the side of the road. Yeah. Come to Poland.
Yeah, all right.
All right, we got first gear.
Yes. She's got the generator in.
Please get in touch with us. The faster we get bulk equipment, then the faster we can give it back to the Ukrainians.